figure stood hidden in the shadows of an old barn, the scent of hay thick in the air. Blue eyes, sharp as knives, were fixated on the distant rolling fields where tall grass swayed like waves in a deep green ocean. It was a late afternoon and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long, looming shadows. Out here, where the land met the sky, one could feel the weight of silence, punctuated only by a gentle breeze. The farmer, John, had always loved this place. It had seen better days, once bustling with life and laughter. Years of hard work and relentless storms had weathered the buildings, but you could still see the heart of it. This was home. Today, though, there was something unsettling in the air, shadows lurking beneath the sunlit surface. Across the fields, on the edge of the dirt road, a group of trespassers gathered. They were young, reckless, their laughter bubbling up like soda fizz. To them, the farm was just an abandoned relic, a forgotten piece of land that offered a thrill. But for John, it was more than that. It was a sanctuary, a place of promise, and today it was open to a new kind of danger. As the group approached the barn, John's heart thumped fiercely against his ribcage. They were careless, giggling as they hopped over the rusting gate, ignorant of the story steeped in every tree and weathered fence post. He'd seen them walking up the road earlier and hoped they would turn back, but they hadn't. Instead, with wild abandon, they wove through the tall grass towards the barn, unaware that they were being watched. A girl shouted, her voice ringing through the air. Her friends cheered, egging her on, pushing each other closer to the threshold. There was something primal in that laughter, a recklessness born from youth, but John knew better. He knew the history of his land. It had teeth and it could bite. From his hidden spot, he could hear their conversations, the excitement laced with a hint of mischief. The tallest boy said, standing at the edge of the barn's entrance. He peered inside, the sunlight pouring like liquid gold over the dusty floor. But in that brightness, danger lurked. John's mind raced. Should he confront them? Should he scare them off or let them have their fun? A wave of anger surged within him. This wasn't just a playground, it was his legacy, a piece of his soul that had weathered storms and solitude. Growing up, he learned that sometimes you must defend what belongs to you. He took a deep breath, grounding himself, reminding himself he was not just a farmer but a guardian of this land. "Come on, guys," one of the boys said, his voice dripping with bravado. They strutted closer, entranced by the mystery of the old barn, oblivious to the watchful eyes lurking just beyond the threshold. A chill ran down John's spine. The memories of his childhood flickered to life. How many summers had he spent in this very barn, climbing hay bales, finding hidden treasures, crafting wild theories of the world beyond the fields. But those carefree days were gone, lost like whispers in the wind. This was no longer a playground. It was a sanctuary being breached. He stepped out of the shadows and into the fading light, just a silhouette against the golden dusk. The moment he moved, the air shifted, heavy with looming consequences. "Hey!" His voice thundered like the skies before a storm, cutting through their laughter. The group froze, wide-eyed, their earlier bravado dissipating like mist. We were just," the tall boy started, but John interrupted, stepping further into the light, allowing them to see the fierce determination etched on his face. "This isn't a game. You don't just waltz onto someone's property without permission," he declared, the words like stones thrown in still water, creating ripples of uncertainty. The group exchanged nervous glances, their excitement quickly morphing into fear. "I'm sorry, we didn't know," a girl said, her voice quavering. "Nothing here is abandoned," John replied, an edge to his tone. "Every blade of grass, every creak of wood, they hold stories." The group began to retreat slowly, the gradual realization settling in they had crossed a line. John knew he had to act, had to push back against the encroaching sense of danger. "You think just because it looks quiet, it's open for all. I've worked this land for years." What happened next surprised him. Instead of running away, they lingered for just a moment, caught between fear and curiosity. The girls exchanged whispers and the boys shuffled their feet. It was a snapshot of youth, the desire to rebel clashing with the instinct for self-preservation. One of the boys asked quietly, his bravado fading. John nodded, his posture relaxing only slightly. "Yes, I am, and I take care of this place." The tall boy hesitated before speaking again. "Do you really live here alone?" "Sometimes I'm not so alone as you think," John replied, watching the sunset paint the world in shades of orange and pink, an ember stirring in his chest. "There's life all around, even when it seems quiet." A flicker of understanding glinted in the boys' eyes, and they began to see the farm for what it was, more than just a piece of land. Here, life and death intertwined and history echoed through every field. Perhaps in their youthful spirits and reckless laughter, they hadn't seen the beauty hidden beneath the surface. One girl asked, genuinely curious now. A pang of vulnerability grazed John's heart. "Because this is where I belong. I'm tied to this land like the roots of an oak tree. It may seem lonely sometimes, but every dawn is a rebirth, and every dusk is a promise." Another wave of silence enveloped the group as they absorbed his words. Tension teetered between them, a moment of connection formed in the fading light. It was a glimpse into a life they hadn't imagined, a flash of what it meant to genuinely be part of something bigger. Finally, the tallest boy spoke up again, his voice fragile but steady. "You know what, we didn't mean to trespass. We thought it would be cool, but..." John nodded, sensing the shift unfolding before him. It wasn't just about scaring them away, it was about fostering a respect and understanding. "You're young. You're curious. Just remember, there's a fine line between adventure and respect." One of the girls looked at John with a spark of challenge, and for a heartbeat, he saw the fire of rebellion in her eyes. But then she glanced back at her friends, the weight of reality pressing against their shoulders. They were not invincible, and that realization settled over them like a blanket. As they turned to leave, John called out, his voice steady. "Wait, one last thing. If you want to come back, bring me a story, one that you think deserves to be told." They paused, caught off guard. The tall boy turned slightly, a flicker of surprise on his face. "Absolutely. Everyone has a story worth sharing." With that, they scattered into the dusk, laughter fading into the distance. As John watched them go, the weight on his chest began to lift. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in twilight, transforming shadows into soft silhouettes. He had done more than scare off trespassers. He had opened a door to possibility. The world around him sang a low hum as the night approached, full of secrets waiting to be discovered. As the farmer retreated into the depths of his barn, surrounded by the echoes of the past and the weight of the present, he realized that perhaps the farm had never truly been deserted. Maybe there was still vibrancy hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right heart to uncover it. The land was alive, filled with stories waiting to be told, and in its vast solitude, connection pulsed, bringing hope and adventure for those willing to listen. The sun hung low in a crimson sky, casting an eerie glow over a sprawling expanse of abandoned fields. Weeds danced in the evening breeze, whispering secrets of long-forgotten times. The farmhouse stood at the end of a cracked gravel path, its peeling paint like the faded memories of laughter that once echoed across the land. This was no ordinary farm. It was a ghostly remnant of what had been vibrant and alive. But today, the silence was about to be shattered. A group of 4 teenagers loitered at the edge of the abandoned property. Unbeknownst to them, they were not the first to tread on this forgotten land. The allure of the mysterious farmhouse was too potent to resist. "Come on, it's just an old house," one of the boys urged, his bravado bubbling over. Eager to impress, his friends rallied behind him, feigning confidence. Sparks of curiosity ignited their spirits, feeding on tales shared in the thrill of youth. They had come for adventure but were oblivious to the eyes that watched them. Hidden behind a thick grove of trees stood an old man, Harold, the farmer who had watched his family's legacy decay into solitude. Weathered skin and a broad-brimmed hat obscured his sharp blue eyes, but even from afar, he sensed the impending trespassers long before they set foot on his land. He had nearly given up hope of ever stopping the curious intruders, resigned to lonely days and nights in a house that barely held together. The land was alive, he could feel it in his bones, and yet it lay dormant, waiting for a spark of life to return. But he wouldn't let that spark be extinguished by naive trespassers seeking thrill without respect. As the teenagers crept onto the property, laughter erupted, breaking the heavy silence like a thunderclap. "Look at this place." A girl squealed, her phone already set to capture the moment. They bounded toward the creaking porch with all the energy of youth, blissfully ignorant of the eyes boring into their backs. Back in the shadows, Harold clutched his walking stick like a lifeline, his heart pounding in his chest. Memories rushed back of pies cooling on windowsills, of family portraits on the walls. The summer nights filled with laughter, the clanging of dinnerware, the joy that wrapped around the old farmhouse like ivy. Each echoing laugh from the group pressed into him like a physical ache. Harold barked out, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. He had meant to keep quiet to watch from the sidelines, but the sight of them frolicking through his land ignited a fire deep inside him. The intruders froze, hearts racing, as they wiped their grins from their faces and turned slowly to view the source of the voice. The leader of the group shouted, a hint of bravado mixed with genuine fear slicing through his tone. They scanned the surroundings, eyes darting among the trees lining the property, their previous confidence waning. Harold emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him. The trespassers stepped back, shivers of realization ripping through their laughter. "We," the girl replied, her bravado cracking like the old wood of the porch beneath her feet. Harold's voice was low and fierce. The sun painted his weathered face in shades of oranges and reds as it sank lower. A boy, his courage melting away, shuffled his feet nervously. "We just wanted to explore," he said, looking down. Harold narrowed his eyes, observing them closely. He saw the bright faces that were just a slight turn towards the world filling with darkness. Things don't just become explorable because you're curious, they have history. The teenagers exchanged unsure glances. A tremor of fear coursed through them, mixed with the guilt of invading this man's sanctuary. "We're really sorry. We didn't mean any harm," the girl said, her voice softening. "And yet here we are," Harold replied, crossing his arms. He wouldn't let them off the hook just yet. A part of him wanted to drive them away, to recapture the solitude he had known so well, the silence that felt like an old friend. But another part, buried deep beneath layers of solitude and hardship, ached for connection, for the stories this land still had to tell. He continued, softening slightly. As they stood before him, nervous but intrigued, Harold decided to prove his point. He pivoted, gesturing for them to follow him toward the old barn, where the sun spilled golden light through the slats. Their eyes widened as they followed him in, the air still thick with the scent of hay and ancient wood. Inside, the walls seemed to pulse with life, remnants of tools that had once helped shape the land's fate, dust motes glittering in the shafts of sunlight as if they were cradling memories from the past. "Look around," Harold said, his voice thickening with emotion. He picked up an old rusty plow, hands brushing against its worn surface. "This belonged to my father, and before him, my grandfather. We crafted lives here." He gestured to the empty fields surrounding them, the silence now a melancholy reminder of everything that had faded away. The group shuffled closer, curiosity replacing their earlier bravado. The girl asked gently, her voice now keen with genuine interest. "Life happened," Harold replied, pain flashing in his eyes. "Farms are like families. They need nurturing. When my family moved on, I thought it would be easy to carry on alone, but the land grew quiet and I grew lonely." The teenagers exchanged solemn glances, the weight of his words settling over them like a heavy fog. "But you're still here," one of the boys said quietly, almost as if he was reassuring both Harold and himself. "Yes," Harold replied, igniting a spark of determination. "I'm still here, but it's not enough. I need help to bring this land back to life." For the first time, the teenagers began to see the depth of the land beneath the surface, the connection of roots intertwined like the lives that had cultivated this place. A sense of wonder filled the room as they gazed at the farm in a new light, not just as a backdrop for their live stream, but as a living entity. The girl asked, her voice trembling with a newfound sense of purpose. Harold smiled softly. It wasn't the world he'd grown accustomed to, but he saw their eagerness to connect. "Start small," he said. "Help me clear the weeds, offer a hand instead of just your presence. Together we can bring this land back. It can be yours too," he encouraged. They stood together, a tangle of youth and age, threads of connection weaving together. The shadows began to recede, not just from the barn but from Harold's heart. "Life is all around us. You just have to look closely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of deep purple and midnight blue, the group rallied behind Harold. They started clearing overgrown patches, sharing stories about their own lives and dreams, becoming not just trespassers but stewards of a forgotten dream. With each weed pulled and stone lifted, the farm breathed a sigh of relief, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed through the fields once more. Harold felt a pulse of excitement coursing through him. The land, once silenced, was awakening beneath the touch of youthful hands. The shadows retreated, replaced by promises yet unearthed. Weeks turned into months, and what began as a chance encounter turned into a rekindled dream. The young hearts became part of the legacy, and the abandoned farm transformed before their very eyes, reclaimed by laughter, respect, and the story spun in those twilight hours. Harold stood watching one evening as the stars twinkled brightly in the night sky, feeling a warmth that had long since faded. The conversations lingered in the air, weaving through the fields like the breeze. In the heart of that old, weathered land, new life thrived and promises were fulfilled, stitching together the past and the future. Sometimes it took an unexpected turn of events to breathe life into forgotten dreams, and sometimes it took a few curious young souls to realize that what was once shadowed could shine brightly once more. Laughter echoed through the rustling grass as the group of 4 teenagers crept closer to the old farmhouse, their eyes gleaming with mischief. They pushed through the tall weeds, the sweet scent of summer surrounding them, infused with the thrill of impending adventure. To them, the sprawling land seemed deserted, a forgotten relic inviting exploration. What they couldn't know, however, was that they weren't alone. Hidden among the shadows of an aging oak tree, an old man named Henry watched. He was the farmer who had woven his life into every inch of this land. Despite its dilapidated condition, Henry had not abandoned his home. He had lost much of the family that once filled the space with laughter and love, but he remained, like the sturdy oaks that endured through the storms. As the teenagers drew closer to his world, their hearts beat with excitement. One girl shouted, the carefree thrill of youth bubbling over. She pointed at the rotting structure, its paint peeling away like old memories. Henry's heart raced as he took a slow step forward, careful to remain hidden. This was his sanctuary, the place where he had poured blood, sweat, and tears. And now, with these trespassers appearing to treat it like a playground, something primal stirred in him. A mix of protectiveness and anger coursed through his veins, but he couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity about these young souls. What would they find in the darkness of that barn? Another boy asked, hesitating at the threshold. He squinted at the barn, its rusted hinges creaking ominously in the wind. We'll be fine. It's just an old building, the leader of the group smirked, puffing out his chest. Impulsively, he stepped inside and the others followed, their whispers lingering in the air. With each creak of the barn door, Henry's heart sank. Part of him wanted to burst out, to confront them and reclaim his land, but he hesitated. He had spent so long watching the world transform from his solitary post, lost in memories of days long gone. What if the encounter could lead somewhere unexpected? In the barn, sunlight poured through the cracks, illuminating layers of dust that floated like tiny fairies lost in time. A heavy silence hung in the air as the teenagers picked up forgotten tools and trinkets, their laughter replaced by awe. Old photographs rested atop rotting crates, remnants of a family's love buried under decades of neglect. The girl exclaimed, holding up a rusted horseshoe. She brushed the dirt off the surface, her fingers tracing the familiar curve. His impulsiveness surged like adrenaline. He called out, eyes gleaming with the thrill of the forbidden. At that moment, Henry felt a surge of protective instinct, like a dam ready to burst. His land meant everything to him. It held stories buried deep, treasures of hope, sorrow, and resilience. Each object had a memory tied to it. They weren't just junk to be played with, they were pieces of his life, threads that wove a story worth protecting. Suddenly, he stepped out of the shadows, the setting sun casting a long silhouette against the barn's weathered door. He boomed, his voice echoing through the stillness. The teenagers froze, their excitement crashing. The tall boy dropped the crate and it fell, splintering wood scattering across the barn floor. We were just. Panic swept across their faces like a sudden gust of wind. Henry took another step forward, fierce determination in his eyes. This isn't a playground. They exchanged glances, the carefree laughter exchanged for uncertainty. The girl with the horseshoe dropped it, her confidence faltering. "We thought no one lived here," she admitted, her voice shrinking under his glare. Henry took a breath, the memories of his family flooding back, late nights spent telling stories and laughter mingling with the sounds of the night. He said, softer now. The hushed energy in the barn crackled with tension, and the boy nodded slowly, trying to regain composure. "Well, we heard it was haunted," Henry said lightly, his eyes narrowing. Intrigued, the group exchanged curious glances, the thrill of adventure igniting once more. As if sensing the sudden shift in the air, Henry motioned for them to follow him outside. Reluctantly, they emerged from the shadows of the barn back into the golden sunset. Henry asked, sweeping his arm across the expanse of farmland. They stood silently, absorbing his words. "It's just old," one of the boys muttered, but he was wrong. There was a glow to the fields, a whisper of memories that lingered in the breeze. Henry stepped closer to the near-ruined fences lining the property. He shared stories of planting seasons, late-night barn dances, and the laughter of children chasing fireflies under the stars. With every word, he painted the past in vibrant colors, images igniting in the teenagers' minds. The girl asked softly, her eyes wide with genuine wonder. "Yes," he replied, meeting her gaze, "and I still do, but it's fading. Just like this barn and these fields, I'm fighting to keep the memories alive." One of the boys stepped forward, the fear in his eyes replaced with curiosity. "We didn't mean to mess anything up." Henry nodded, sensing their regret. "You think things are empty just because they seem quiet. The world is filled with life, even when it's hard to see." The tall boy looked back at the barn, his bravado stripping away like paint, exposing something deeper. "So, what can we do?" That question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown into troubled waters. Hope flared in Henry's chest. Perhaps this unexpected encounter could blossom into something greater, a way for his stories to breathe again. "If you're willing," he began, "we could clear some of this land, revitalize it." The teenagers glanced at each other, excitement mingled with apprehension swirling in their minds. The girl repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "Of course," Henry smiled, warmth sweeping over him. "Every hand that joins in brings life back." Slowly, trust began to form as they exchanged tentative smiles. What had started as trespassing transformed into a commitment, an intertwining of lives. As twilight thickened around them, the air buzzed with new possibilities. Together, they ventured into the heart of the fields, a concord of youth and wisdom intertwined on the fabric of the land. Their laughter drifted on the evening breeze as they grabbed shovels and began breaking the crust of earth that had stood dormant for too long. Over weeks, the farm transformed. Together, they cleared debris, repaired fences, and planted seeds. It became a communal effort filled with truly shared stories, and laughter echoed among the rows of crops. Henry watched as laughter buzzed through the air. Each day held the promise of revival, binding these young souls into the fabric of the land. Soon, the farmhouse transformed too, its weathered door now adorned with fresh paint and flowers blooming around its base. The once derelict barn became a hub of creativity. They held movie nights, dance parties, and gatherings infused with dreams and hopes that melted into the warmth of the land. One evening, under the moonlight that bathed the fields in a silver glow, Henry turned to the group. He asked, leading them to the edge of a starlit field. The teenagers nodded, glancing at each other, their understanding deepening. "It connects us," one of them said softly. Henry smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "Exactly. We all have stories to tell, and they weave a tapestry that transcends time. This land holds my history, but it now holds yours, too." As they stood shoulder to shoulder, the world around them came alive, pulsing with laughter, memories, and connection. The past and present merged in the fullness of the moment, the lessons of history shaping the promise of tomorrow. And just like that, a bond formed, the kind that thrived under sunlit skies and moonlit nights, a bridge between generations. What had begun as trespass became a reclamation of a legacy, each heartbeat reverberating through the fields. Years later, when the sun cast its final rays over the farm, the echoes of laughter would rise with the evening breeze. Henry had become more than just a guardian of land. He had woven the dreams of youth into every blade of grass, each note of laughter somehow revitalizing the spirit buried deep in the earth. In the fabric of that land, new stories wove together the past and future, reminding everyone that even when things seem deserted, there's always room for connection, growth, and stories yet to be told. The sun hung low in the evening sky, spilling shades of gold and crimson across the horizon. The fields, once vibrant and alive, swayed gently in the warm breeze, but a sense of stillness lingered in the air. The old farmhouse stood at the end of a long, winding path, its once bright paint peeling like old memories shrouded in dust. To outsiders, it all seemed abandoned, desolate, a forgotten corner of the world. But hidden behind a thicket of trees, a pair of keen eyes watched intently. Old Tom, the farmer who had spent decades tending to these fields, stood cloaked in the shadows of the fading sunlight. He had witnessed countless seasons come and go, and yet today something was amiss. He could feel it in his bones. A group of trespassers had arrived, their laughter tumbling through the air like stones dropped in a quiet pond. "Come on," urged a tall boy, the leader of the group, whose bravado crackled like static electricity. They were a motley crew, fueled by reckless youth and curiosity, unaware of the weight of history they were about to bear witness to. As they stepped closer, their voices grew louder, bouncing off the weathered walls of the farmhouse. One girl called out, and for a heartbeat, the land fell silent as if holding its breath. Tom's heart raced. He was familiar with trespassers. They often descended upon the farm like hungry vultures, chasing thrills without a second thought. They thought the land was empty, a ghost of its former self. But he had long known that the echoes of memory still resided here, layered beneath silence. He felt the urge to interject, to protect his legacy, but he chose to remain hidden, observing their youthful exuberance. Another boy shouted, their voices carrying the thrill of adventure. They bounded towards the decrepit structure, their feet trampling through the tall grass that had long since taken over the path. Tom felt a pang in his chest. The barn was more than just a building. It was his refuge, a place filled with echoes of laughter and love woven into the very wood. As they approached, the barn creaked mournfully, the hinges squealing as one of the boys swung the doors open. Sunlight flooded the interior, illuminating dust particles swirling in the air like tiny fairies lost in time. Old tools hung from the walls, rusty and forgotten, while remnants of hay spilled across the floor, each a testament to the history that once thrived in this space. The teenagers gasped, and their laughter filled the barn, transforming its solemnity into a temporary playground. The tall boy exclaimed, gripping a rusted handle as if it were a trophy. Tom watched, a mix of anxiety and reluctant nostalgia tugging at his heartstrings. They were treating his life's work like a relic meant for fun, oblivious to the blood and sweat that had forged every inch of this land. A wave of protectiveness surged through him, and he decided it was time to make his presence known. He stepped out from the trees, his calloused hands resting at his sides, his figure silhouetted against the fading daylight. He thundered, his voice booming like thunder, echoing through the barn and silencing the raucous laughter. The teenagers froze, eyes wide as saucers, their earlier bravado vanishing in an instant. The tall boy dropped the plow handle, the clatter reverberating through the hushed space. He stammered, his confidence evaporating. "I'm the farmer, and this is my land," Tom replied, his voice steady, carrying the weight of seasons past. He could feel their fear, a primal instinct that kicked in when faced with authority. The girl with bright red hair exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly. "Looks can be deceiving," Tom shot back, taking a step closer. "Every blade of grass, every piece of rusted metal tells a story." A moment of silence hung heavy in the air as they absorbed his words. One boy fidgeted, clearly regretting the adventure that had led them here. It was unsettling, seeing their youthful faces suddenly drawn tight with concern. Rather than anger, Tom felt a pang of something else, understanding and a flicker of hope. He continued, his voice softening, the tide shifting. "The barn felt less like a battleground and more like a sacred ground. It's the memories that linger." The tall boy asked, curiosity brightening his eyes. Tom gestured to a wall adorned with old photographs, fading yet so full of life. "These are my family. We worked this land for generations. Each face here carried dreams, heartbreak, hope." Slowly, the group moved closer, stepping carefully as if they were crossing sacred ground. Tom watched their intrigued expressions, curiosity blossoming beneath guarded exteriors. In that moment, a bridge formed between their contrasting worlds. The girl asked, her eyes softening. "Time," Tom replied, his voice wrapped in bittersweet nostalgia. "Life took them away. One by one, my family left, chasing their own dreams or following the winds of life." The weight of his words hung in the air, igniting a connection. "But sometimes it feels like a burden," he admitted, glancing toward the barn where young lives once danced and celebrated. "This place has been quiet for too long, but it still has stories to offer." The teenagers exchanged glances, vulnerability mingling among them. They had stepped into that barn as trespassers, driven by a thrill that masked deeper yearning, and now, standing with Tom, they felt the weight of history. The barn was a canvas for their own untold stories. The red-haired girl hesitated, her voice tentative yet brave. "What if we helped?" The other teenagers perked up, a flicker of excitement dancing in their eyes. "Yeah," one boy exclaimed, the thrill of newfound purpose igniting their spirits. Tom felt a swell of hope. Maybe this was a chance to revive not just the land, but his own spirit. "If you're willing to put in the work, I could use the help," the tall boy said, disbelief tinging his voice. "Nothing worth doing ever comes easy," Tom replied with a nod. "You help me, and I'll teach you everything I know about this land." As twilight descended, the shadows grew long, but a new light had sparked among them. The teenagers gathered around Tom, eager to listen as he began sharing his knowledge about the land, the cycles of growth, and the stories stitched in the soil. They worked side by side over the following weeks, clearing debris and pulling weeds, their laughter reverberating against the barn walls. With each pass of the rake, with every shovel plunged into the earth, old wounds began to heal, both for Tom and for the young souls who had wandered onto his land. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation was miraculous. Color began seeping back into the fields, flowers blossomed, and sunflowers rose high, like sun-kissed sentinels watching over the revival. As they sweated and toiled, Tom shared stories of his family. The way his mother danced in the garden while his father worked the fields, the laughter that spilled from the farmhouse during family gatherings. With every tale, the teenagers grew more connected to the land, to Tom, and to the legacy they were creating together. One evening, sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple, Tom smiled, watching the teenagers share a bowl of ice cream and recount their favorite moments. The warmth of connection wrapped around them, filling the spaces where silence had once lingered. "Thank you for this," he said softly, breaking into their laughter. The group turned, smiles brightening their faces, carrying the warmth of camaraderie that transcended generational divides. The tall boy joked, triggering a round of laughter. Tom chuckled, but there was a sincerity in his gaze. "You know, this land needs young hearts." In that moment, they understood. They weren't just workers or helpers. They had become stewards of something greater. They were the lifeblood of this legacy, weaving the past into the future. The land wasn't just soil beneath their feet, but a canvas painted with shared hopes and dreams. As seasons changed and the air shifted with the smells of summer turning to autumn, the farm became a vibrant gathering place, filled with laughter and songs. They celebrated harvests, shared meals, and formed bonds that seemed unbreakable. One afternoon, as the sun hung lazily in the sky, Tom gathered the teenagers in the barn once more. Straw scattered across the floor, the beams creaked under the weight of laughter and stories shared. He stood before them, a hint of emotion flickering in his eyes, reflecting gratitude and hope. "I want you to promise me something," he said. They sat up straight, their laughter fading into an attentive hush. "As you grow and move on in life, carry this land with you." The teenagers nodded, a quiet understanding permeating the space. They could feel the pulse of the land, the heartbeat that connected them all, binding their stories together. So they carried on, each of them leaving their mark, returning often to the farm, their sanctuary. The old farmhouse and barn transformed, no longer silent monuments of the past, but vibrant spaces filled with life and laughter. Years later, when Tom looked out over the fields, he saw not just the fruits of their labor, but the thriving spirit of renewed hope. The land, once thought deserted, was alive and pulsing, breathing with memories both old and new. The young souls had woven their stories into the tapestry of the farm, and in doing so, had found their own place among the legacy that the land would continue to honor. And so, the whispers of history danced on the breeze, reminding everyone who stood on that ground that beneath the surface, in the quiet of seemingly abandoned places, stories awaited listening hearts ready to connect, to cultivate, and to ensure that the past lived on, forever intertwined with the future. Laughter bounced through the fields, a carefree melody overlaying the hum of nature. 4 teenagers, emboldened by summer's heat, crept down a neglected path leading to a long-abandoned farmhouse. The sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the dusky light casting eerie shadows on the uneven ground. To them, it seemed like an adventure waiting to unfold. What they didn't know was that they weren't alone. Hidden behind a crumbling stone wall, a pair of sharp eyes watched their every move. Old Jim wasn't ready to let go of his family's land. Years of toil and heart poured into these fields had etched themselves into his very being. As the teenagers strutted toward the porch, he felt a mix of protectiveness and irritation swelling within him. A girl exclaimed, bounding up the steps, her excitement sharp and infectious. They thought the house was deserted, long lost to time. Old Jim, however, had been there all along, embracing the solitude that came with age and a slowly fading legacy. Old memories flooded back as Jim's heart tightened. He remembered the warm laughter that used to fill those walls, children racing through rooms, life bursting at every seam. Now he felt the chill of the past sinking in, echoing the silence that had wrapped around the farmhouse. He couldn't let these intruders treat his heritage as a mere playground. Jim's voice rang out, deep and booming, echoing through the dying light. The laughter froze, the joy evaporating instantly as the teenagers turned, eyes wide with shock and uncertainty. The tall boy at the front stammered, his bravado fading. Jim stepped out from the shadows, tall and imposing, the fading sunlight illuminating the weathered lines on his face. He felt a surge of anger. This land was his, full of memories and stories, and these kids treated it like a playground. The girl protested, her voice trembling slightly. He replied, crossing his arms, his gaze firm. Their earlier excitement was replaced by confusion. They exchanged wary glances, taken aback by his intensity. "We didn't know," the tall boy said, backing up a step. "Looks can be deceiving," Jim snapped, the edges of his voice sharp. "This land holds history." The truth in his words cut through the air, and for a moment they stood in uneasy silence, facing the man who had lived through decades of laughter, loss, and hope. But something about his stance softened them. Perhaps it was the way his eyes glimmered with both anger and a flicker of pain. "Look," Jim said, his tone now a mixture of authority and desperation. "You want adventure, help me instead." Confusion swept across their faces. "Revive it?" the girl asked, curiosity edging out her fear. "For too long, this land has been quiet. It's time to bring it back to life," Jim told them, gesturing toward the fields that had grown wild and unruly. The teenagers exchanged glances, a silent conversation blossoming with promise and uncertainty. Finally, the tall boy nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll help." As they gathered around him, Jim felt a shift. For the first time in years, he was sharing his struggle instead of guarding it. "Looming," he instructed, leading them to the barn, its weathered doors creaking open to reveal years of dust and memories hidden within. The sight took their breath away. Shadows danced in the twilight, illuminating forgotten tools hanging on the walls and fragments of the past waiting to be uncovered. "This is where it all starts," Jim said, sweeping a hand across the space. "We'll need to clean up first." The girl asked, her interest growing. "Everything, vegetables, flowers, whatever you want," Jim replied. "But remember, it takes hard work." With that, they rolled up their sleeves and set to work. The first few hours focused on heavy lifting, shoveling debris, sweeping away layers of dust, and sorting through old tools. As the sunlight began to dip below the horizon, the barn started to shed its ghostly appearance, revealing glimmers of its former glory. As they worked, Jim shared stories. He spoke of long, hot summers and the harvests that filled the tables with laughter, of nights when the stars felt like lanterns guarding their dreams. The kids were hooked, hanging onto each word, their interest in this place deepening. A bond began to form, and laughter soon filled the air once more. They shared jokes, exchanged stories of their own lives, and for the first time in years, Jim felt the burdens lift. Jim called out, a playful grin breaking through his rugged demeanor. The teenagers laughed, and as dusk settled, they engaged in a playful challenge, racing to the edge of the field. But the joy didn't erase the weight in Jim's heart. He had spent so long alone, his days marked by solitude and the echoes of the past. He had almost forgotten what it meant to share a space with people. Yet standing alongside these kids, the land seemed to pulse with life once more, the memories evolving into something new. Days turned into weeks, and their efforts began to bear fruit literally. Seedlings sprouted in eager rows, and wildflowers bloomed, painting patches of color across the once dull landscape. Each sprout was a symbol of rejuvenation, a testament to what hard work and cooperation could achieve. One afternoon, while they were planting a new batch of tomatoes, the girl paused and looked up, a serious expression creasing her brow. "Jim, why don't you ever leave this place?" He hesitated, the sun reflecting off his weathered face. He took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "This land holds my family's history. They worked it, loved it, and I've spent my life trying to keep it alive. But you're so much more than just a farmer," the boy spoke up, energy electrifying his voice. "You have stories, you have life. It shouldn't just be about keeping the past alive." Jim felt the truth in that, an understanding budding within him. Maybe all these years he'd held on too tightly, fearing what it meant to let go. Maybe it was time for him to embrace the future while cherishing the past. "Perhaps you're right," he admitted, the weight of his own words settling in. With each passing week, the teenagers were no longer just seasonal workers. They became a real part of his life. They celebrated harvests, holding dinners in the farmhouse where laughter filled every corner. As autumn painted the leaves in fiery colors, Jim found himself not only sharing stories, but also creating new ones. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the teenagers gathered on the porch, sipping lemonade, their faces glowing with contentment. "You've turned this place around, Jim," one of the girls said, grinning as she leaned back in her chair. Jim chuckled, a warmth blossoming in his chest. "You kids make it easy." But that night, as they sat together, Tom received a notification on his phone, a message from an old friend. It felt like a punch to the gut. "They're selling the land," he said quietly, the words hanging heavy in the air. The tall boy asked, confusion clouding his face. "My family is trying to sell the property since no one's here, no one to carry it on," Jim replied, bitterness creeping into his tone. The air turned thick as the weight of reality settled. The teens exchanged looks. This was more than just a summer job. They had become part of something meaningful, something worth fighting for. The girl asked, her determination shining through. "Perhaps a community gathering," the tall boy suggested excitedly. For the first time in a long while, Jim felt hope flicker in his chest. The planning began in earnest. They worked night and day, reaching out to locals, sharing their stories, showing photos of the vibrant harvest that had sprung from the soil. Excitement buzzed through the community as word spread of a celebration, the return of the farm, the revival of its spirit. As the day approached, the anticipation mounted. Families arrived with laughter ringing in the air, children darting through hay bales, adults mingling and sharing the vibrant spirit that emerged from the revived land. The barn was decorated with bright flowers planted by those very same teenagers who had saved it from oblivion. When Jim stood outside greeting guests, the energy was electric. The turnout was overwhelming. People arrived, drawn not just by curiosity, but also by the essence of connection that had blossomed on that land. As the sun set, Jim took to the makeshift stage set up in front of the barn. A community of faces turned toward him. He cleared his throat, the moment heavy with emotion. "Thank you all for coming." The crowd erupted into applause, and pride surged in Jim's heart. These weren't just strangers, they were newfound allies. Together, They were not only reviving a farm, but also preserving a piece of their lives woven into the fabric of the land. After the festivities, the energy lingered, and enthusiasm spread like wildfire. In the following weeks, they began crafting plans to preserve the farm as a community space, a place where stories would be shared for generations to come. Through it all, Jim found not just an extension of his family's legacy, but an entirely new chapter waiting to be written. And as for the teenagers, they had stepped away from their roles as trespassers. They had become caretakers of a living story, forever intertwined in the rhythm of land, laughter, and love. In the heart of that sunset-kissed farm, a revival took place, a gathering of spirits that echoed through the fields. Memories birthed anew, danced upon the breeze, uniting past and future, a testament to the bonds formed among the stories in the soil. The cycle of life continued, weaving the narrative of those who nurtured it, reminding them all that even when things seem deserted, an unyielding heartbeat echoes beneath the surface, waiting for the right hearts to discover it. Under the pale wash of moonlight, a group of teenagers crept down a gravel path that wound through tall, overgrown grass. The air was thick with the scent of summer evenings, and excitement hung between them like electricity. They whispered and giggled, each step leading them closer to what appeared to be the perfect adventure, an old, abandoned farm, left to the brush and the whispers of the wind. The weathered farmhouse loomed in front of them, dark and silent, a specter from the past that beckoned them forward. Unbeknownst to them, eyes watched from the shadows. Hidden behind the gnarled trunk of a centuries-old oak was Jake, the farmer who had called this land home for most of his life. Every creak of the dilapidated porch, every murmur of laughter made his heart race. He hadn't expected visitors, not in all these years of solitude. But now, as these intruders toyed with his memories, a fire ignited deep within him. Shouted one boy, a rush of bravado fueling his reckless enthusiasm. Jake clenched his jaw, a wave of anger bubbling just beneath the surface. They thought they could invade his peace, treating the farm as mere entertainment. This wasn't just land to him. It was a tapestry of memories, woven from years of laughter, toil, and heartache. As they approached the porch, the floorboards creaked under their weight, the sound echoing into the stillness of the night. The teenagers jumped, and for a moment they looked back, unease flickering in their eyes. But curiosity won out. They crowded around the old wooden door, its paint peeling like the remnants of memories fading into time. One girl whispered wide-eyed as she took a step back. "Nah, it's just a dump," the tall boy sneered, pushing the door open with a deliberate shove. It creaked loudly, protesting against the intrusion. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the weight of forgotten stories. Shadows danced across the walls, and the dim light from their phone screens illuminated fragments of a life once full of energy. Old photographs hung crookedly, memories trapped in brown, dusty frames. The remnants of a family dinner table, long set but never used. This was no ordinary adventure. This was a portal to another time. The girl exclaimed, taking in the remnants of the past with excitement. "Look at all this stuff." Jake took a deep breath, fighting the urge to shout them away. Instead, he stepped closer, shielding himself behind a tree outside. The teenagers giggled and explored, turning forgotten treasures into novelties, completely blind to the weight of their actions. The tall boy called from the kitchen, holding up an old frying pan, the surface dulled by years of neglect. He swung it like a weapon, making the others laugh. But as the pan whirled through the air, it felt too close to a violation for Jake, and the anger began to boil over. They were treating his home like a plaything, and this was no game. Jake shouted, his voice booming as he stepped into the clear. He could no longer hold back. Stepping from the shadows felt like stepping back into the world he had mostly forgotten. The teenagers froze, fear etching itself into their faces. The tall boy dropped the pan and it clattered to the ground. "I'm the owner," Jake replied, his eyes narrowing. The tension ricocheted through the room. The girl's bravado faltered and she took a cautious step back. We didn't know anyone lived here," she stammered, her voice tinged with fear and guilt. Jake shot back, his patience fraying. "You think you can just waltz into someone's home without a second thought?" For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and the once-spirited laughter faded into uncertainty. The teenagers exchanged glances, wrestling with fear and regret. The boy finally spoke, breaking the stillness. "We're sorry." Jake's anger began to wane, replaced by something less aggressive, a flicker of regret for his own solitude. The truth was, this farm had become a ghost of his own making. Alone for so long, he had felt seen only by the occasional deer or squirrel, but now, standing before these intruders, he realized he craved interaction. "Listen," he began, his tone softening. "I know this place looks empty, but it's full of life if you care to see. You're lucky to have come here. This land has history." Curiosity sparked in the teenager's eyes, and he saw the collective, youthful spirit flicker with interest. The girl asked, stepping forward with caution. "It's a story of love and loss, work and reward," Jake explained, a wistful smile touching his lips. "Every corner of this house, every tree outside holds a memory." The group hesitated, fear still lingering, but their curiosity overwhelmed it. They were no longer mere trespassers. Their adventure morphed into an opportunity to delve into the heart of a life they had misunderstood. The tall boy asked, glancing at his friends. Their bravado had faded, replaced by genuine intrigue. "Help me restore it," Jake replied, feeling a warm swell of hope. "The land is as alive as you choose to make it, but it takes effort." The teenagers exchanged glances again, a silent conversation passing between them. They could sense the sincerity in Jake's voice, a warm eagerness that replaced the initial hostility. "All right," the girl said, determination settling in. "Let's do it." And so it began. They spent long, industrious days together. With gloves donned and tools in hand, the teenagers began to clear away the years of neglect. Weeds were pulled, dirt was turned, and laughter filled the air once more. As they worked, Jake shared his stories, recounting tales of harvests, family gatherings, and nights under the stars filled with dreams. The teenagers listened, captivated. The land transformed beneath their hands, but more importantly, the connection between them deepened. The tall boy asked one afternoon as they tore down an abandoned fence. Jake paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I can't. It's home, whether it's quiet or loud, whether it's thriving or barely hanging on." The summer days passed in a blur of productivity and friendship, each moment weaving tighter the fabric of their collective narrative. Jake taught them about nature's cycles, the importance of patience and nurturing, as they planted seeds into warm earth. One evening, as the sky blazed in colors brighter than they had ever seen, Jake watched the teenagers sit around a fire. They shared their own stories of school, heartbreaks, dreams, and fears. For the first time in a long while, laughter echoed across the farm. The air thrummed with life, a harmony building between generations. But the past wasn't done haunting him. One evening, while he stood watching the sun dip below the horizon, he received a call from a realtor. The land was still on the market, and the reminder of its fate weighed heavily. If he didn't act soon, the place would slip through his fingers, and it wouldn't just be a story lost. It would be a piece of himself. As the days passed, he felt torn. The teenagers had filled a void he didn't know existed, yet he feared the bittersweet end that lingered in the air. Would they stay, or would they leave him, like everyone else had? It all came to a head during an early evening barbecue they had planned to celebrate their progress. The sun cast long shadows, and Jake watched as laughter erupted around the grill. But something tugged at his heart, and he knew he had to say something. As they gathered around the table, he cleared his throat, his voice wavering. The laughter faded, and curiosity tightened their expressions. The girl asked, leaning in. "I got a call from the realtor," he began, his heart heavy with the weight of the news. "If this place doesn't get sold soon, it might be too late for me. I don't know what to do." Reality hit, palpable silence settling over the gathering. The joy of the evening was suddenly overshadowed by a profound sense of urgency. "Wait," the tall boy said, his brow furrowed. "Is there really no way we can help? We love it here." Jake felt a rush of gratitude, but also a fear of hope. "I don't know if it can be saved," he replied, his heart sinking. "But perhaps there's a way to keep the essence of it alive, even if the land—" The girl exclaimed, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "We can't let that happen, this farm. It's part of who we are now." Tears welled in Jake's eyes as he heard their sincerity. In that moment, he realized they believed in this place just as deeply as he did. It wasn't just his story anymore, it was theirs too. The tall boy shouted, igniting passion among the group. We could organize a community fundraiser, gather support, and show people what this farm means. That spark ignited something within Jake, a flicker of hope in the right direction. He asked, the urgency of the situation mingling with the warmth they had cultivated together. The girl said, determination glimmering in her eyes, so they began to dream. They spread the word, organizing an event to showcase not just the farm, but also the stories that lay within it. They painted signs, crafted invitations, and reached out to the local community to come and celebrate the richness of the land. The day of the event arrived, and the air buzzed with anticipation. As families poured into the farm, Jake stood on the porch, watching the scene unfold. Laughter echoed across the fields as children ran through the rows of sunflowers, families milled about, and food sizzled on the grill. He took a breath, his heart swelling with pride. He had transformed this place not just with hard work, but with love and connection. When it came time to speak, his voice trembled with emotion. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, gazing at the faces familiar and new. "This land has been my heart and my home for as long as I can remember." The crowd erupted in applause, and tears stung Jake's eyes as he felt embraced by the community he had nearly lost. When the event concluded, the support flooded in, stronger than he could have ever imagined. The stories of the farm began to spread, drawing in even more help, and slowly the tides began to turn. Weeks passed, but that moment of hope never faded. They worked tirelessly, gathering resources, donations, and ideas. And through it all, the bond between the teenagers and Jake deepened, each new step bringing fulfillment into their lives. In the end, they didn't just save a farm, they restored a community. Jake learned that family didn't require blood. It could be woven from laughter, kindness, and shared purpose. As they stood together one twilight evening, watching the sun sink below the horizon, Jake turned to the group, filled with overwhelming gratitude. "You've breathed life back into me and into this land." The teenagers smiled, their hearts resonating with those words. Amidst the struggles and challenges, they had created something beautiful together. The farm once thought dead was abuzz with life again. It stood not only as a reflection of history, but as a beacon of hope for the future. And while Jake was no longer just a farmer standing alone, he wasn't just a guardian of tales either. He was part of a larger narrative, forever intertwined in the bonds of family and friendship. In the warm embrace of twilight, surrounded by laughter and new beginnings, they stood shoulder to shoulder, reclaiming the once deserted land and filling it with stories waiting to be told anew. A cool summer breeze slipped through the tall grass, bending it softly like waves in a hidden ocean. The late afternoon sun painted the skies with hues of gold and orange as shadows stretched long across the land. Four teenagers, fueled by boredom and the thrill of adventure, crouched low as they approached a weathered farmhouse. To them, it was a playground of secrets waiting to be uncovered, a forgotten relic left to the whims of nature. Jake, the tallest, whispered excitedly, glancing back at his friends. Each heartbeat echoed the throbbing pulse of youth, filled with reckless abandon. Little did they know, eyes were already watching. Kurt, the farmer, stood camouflaged among the trees that bordered his property, the thick bark providing a sanctuary as he clenched the handle of a rusted shovel. He had been silently watching the group with a mixture of anger and sadness. His heart thudded in rhythm with the thrill of those young souls, but his mind was a storm. This land, once vibrant and alive, had become a silent guardian of memories, and here they were, about to trample through it without a second thought. The teenagers edged closer to the porch, their footsteps stirring up dust and memories suspended in time. "It looks abandoned," Lily, a girl with fiery red hair, said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity as she lifted her phone to capture the moment. She added, giggling as she opened the door, the hinges creaking like an old man waking from a deep sleep. In that very moment, Kurt felt a surge of longing. This wasn't just an old house, it was his family legacy. Each crack in the wall whispered stories of laughter and love shared over the many years. He had hoped to keep it alive, to protect it like a treasure chest filled with the life his family once lived here. He bellowed, stepping forward, the weight of his voice cascading over the land like thunder. The laughter ceased immediately. The teens turned abruptly, the color drained from their faces as fear flooded in. Jake fumbled back, almost stumbling over a weathered chair. "Who?" He managed to stammer, his bravado evaporating in the face of authority. "I'm the owner, and you're trespassing," Kurt replied, his voice steady but hardened by years of isolating his pain. Lily protested, her eyes wide. Kurt felt the anger bubble inside him, but then tempered it with a flicker of understanding. He recalled his own youthful thrill-seeking adventures, the innocent laughter of his own childhood. "Does it look abandoned?" The teenagers stood frozen, uncertainty cascading over them. Each of them finally grasped the weight of what they had disrupted. Kurt could see their eyes darting, fear mingling with curiosity. Jake finally asked, his voice trembling but genuine. Kurt took a deep breath. Perhaps this moment could lead somewhere beyond hostility. "This farm holds history. We once filled this place with life and laughter. But time, well, it can be cruel." The air shifted as the truth of his words resonated within them. For a moment, their youthful bravado crumbled, leaving bare souls yearning for connection and understanding. Asked Lily, now stepping forward, her curiosity overtaking her fear. Kurt's heart softened, memories flooding back. "Life, I suppose. People grow apart. They move away." As he spoke, images flickered in his mind. Summer evenings filled with family dinners, the scent of pie cooling on a windowsill, laughter bursting through the doors, a symphony of memories. The teenagers shifted closer, their shared excitement dimmed, replaced by a newfound respect. Jake asked hesitantly, breaking the weight of silence. Kurt looked at them, disbelief washing over him. Could these young souls truly forge a connection with a place he feared losing? His heart battled with doubt. They chorused, a profound wave of determination sweeping through them. As Kurt led them deeper into the farmhouse, he felt an unexpected flicker of hope. Together, they began clearing dust-laden surfaces and sorting through boxes filled with remnants of love long forgotten. Each object they uncovered sparked stories, filling the space with laughter again. Gradually, the teens became more than just visitors. They became a part of the farm's rebirth. Days turned into weeks, each moment stitched together with the bonds formed around shared sweat and laughter. The farm began to come alive, not just in the physical sense but with renewed spirit. Lily exclaimed one afternoon, her eyes bright with excitement as she plucked a sun-ripened fruit from the vine they'd planted together. Jake added, tossing one to Kurt, who caught it with a grin, the corners of his mouth lifting for the first time in years. But as summer drifted gracefully into autumn, the tension beneath the surface began to tighten again. The nights grew colder and Kurt's worry nagged at him like an unwelcome ghost. Would he really be able to hang on to this farm? One evening, as they sat around the fire pit they had built, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, the warmth of friendship enveloped them. But as the flames flickered, so did Kurt's resolve. He gathered his courage, looking at the teenagers who had become a family to him. "It's been great having you all here, but I need to be honest," he began, his heart thudding against his ribcage. "The farm is still on the market." Their laughter faded, replaced by nervous glances. Jake asked, worry etched on his face. "I don't know how much longer I can keep it," Kurt admitted, vulnerability breaking through the walls he had built around himself. The group fell silent, the weight of his words settling around them like the evening chill. Lily whispered, her voice earnest, as if her passion could weave a spell over their fate. Kurt hesitated, a flicker of doubt twinkling in his eyes. "It's too late." "Why don't we hold an event?" Jake shouted suddenly, lighting a fire within the group. "We could crowdsource, get people to see how special this place is." That spark ignited something in Kurt's heart. Could it really work? His reluctance softened as he looked at their excited faces. They chorused again, their energy contagious as they planned ideas, making lists of local businesses that could contribute and friends who could spread the word. The days that followed were filled with frenetic energy. They painted signs, crafted flyers, and organized food donations. The hard work soon transformed into camaraderie, fueling the hope that had almost slipped through Kurt's fingers. Finally, the day of the event arrived, and the sun shone brightly, illuminating the entire farm with renewed vibrancy. Families and friends came from nearby towns, curiosity piquing their interest. Kurt felt a well of anticipation swell within him as he watched dozens of people wandering through the farm, laughter echoing across the fields. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm glow, Kurt stepped up to introduce himself. His heart raced as he faced the crowd gathered in front of him, his own fears struggling for airtime. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. This farm has been in my family for generations." The crowd clapped and the warmth of their support enveloped him. But Kurt felt an unsettled flicker in the back of his mind. The weight of the moment drifted as he recognized a familiar face in the crowd, a figure in a suit with a serious expression. It was the realtor, standing at the edge, arms crossed, watchful and measuring. As Kurt's words breathed life into stories long buried, he sensed the realtor's eyes piercing into him. They were there to gauge interest, to count the pulse of this farm, and it felt like an ominous storm gathering at the edge of his carefully constructed hope. Suddenly, he heard a rustle in the crowd. Gasps echoed, and as the tension fluctuated around him, Kurt felt heat rise in his chest. Some folks said they want to turn the farmland into housing, another voice shouted, panic filling the air. Kurt's heart sank. The very thing he had been fighting against was inching closer. He blurted out, desperation creeping into his tone. "We can save it." But the murmur grew louder, murmurs of concern, uncertainty, and rising protests against change. The shadows cast by the setting sun deepened in intensity, and the crowd buzzed with unease around him. Kurt looked around, his community, his support, the faces of the teenagers who had become a part of his life. But the sudden tension threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. Would this day mark the revival they dreamed of, or the beginning of the end? He shouted, finding strength within his voice. But as people murmured, a few began to sway, shifting their loyalty to fear and doubt rather than hope. As chaos threatened to consume the moment, Kurt squared his shoulders, eyes locked on the realtor. The storm was brewing, and somehow he had to stand his ground, not just for himself, but for the future buried beneath the soil, his family, their stories, and the precious memories that intertwined. Would they rally together to face this encroaching shadow, or would the very essence of the land drift away, swallowed by the tides of change? The sun dipped below the horizon, darkness settling in. The outcome rested in the balance, heavy with uncertainty, as Kurt stood at the crossroads of fight or flight. In that moment, he realized the true heart of the farm was pulsing, waiting for him to reclaim it or watch it fade into nothingness. The choice hung in the air like the last lingering light of day, tinged with both tension and possibility.